So this is a pretty hard video to make because the subject matter is so convoluted, confusing, obscure, that it's hard to see through the fog to actually get to the point. But I think it's an important video to make. So complicated, confusing, obscure, I can only be talking about the government, right? Now, before we go any further, this has nothing to do with politics. I'm completely apolitical when it comes to this stuff. I'm neither left nor right. Okay, for lack of a better term, I'm a libertarian, but I'm not a libertarian. I'm right down the middle. I'm a centrist. I'm an American, and I don't take sides. I try to be fair to both sides. I always play devil's advocate. So don't make this about politics. I don't like politics. Politics, right? You know, linguistics are important. Politics. Many blood-sucking creatures. Politics. Okay? Let's not go there. Save that. So the thing that I'm referring to is the Chevron deference. All right, now this is really obscure. This is a little bit of law that's like buried, and up until recently nobody's talked about it. But this is an important roadblock, or was an important roadblock. And if you wonder how certain things have come to pass, as far as berserk, out of control regulation that really appears to be in defiance of the Constitution and defiance of your rights, not only from an individual level, but from a business on a corporate level. If you ever wondered why you can't buy a reasonable small pickup truck, or how they're managing to cram all of this EV stuff through the systems. If you're wondering about these things, the Chevron deference is where you really start. And the dismantling of it by the Supreme Court a couple of weeks ago is a huge step in the right direction to setting things right. So, and by right, I don't mean politically right, I mean right in the way that our government is supposed to work. Now, one of the things about our government is it's obscure, and it's obscure kind of for a reason. They stopped teaching civics in the 1970s for a reason, okay? They don't want the average person knowing what really goes on or how things actually work. They prefer you just live in a fog. So I guess we have to start this with a basic, civics lesson. And we have to make this as simple as possible to really, let's make this as simple as possible, like second grade stuff, okay? The three branches of government. You've got the executive branch, you've got the legislative branch, and you have the judicial branch. So the executive branch is the people who you vote for, the president that is selected. That's the executive branch and all of the people around him. Then you have the legislative branch. That's Congress, the legislation. They make the laws. And then you've got the judicial branch. And the judicial branch determines whether those laws are in line with your rights. Okay, and before we go any further, I know there's a distinct difference between the legal system that we operate in and a justice system, which is what we're supposed to have. It's on paper, right? I know all of this stuff. I know admiralty law. I've been there, done it, got the t-shirt. That's not for this channel, it's not for this time. So at any rate, the judicial system is supposed to take the laws that are passed by the legislature and determine if they're fair, if they're overreaching, if they're in line with your rights, as far as the Constitution goes. That's the job of the judicial system. And you've got a system of checks and balances. And what checks and balances basically means is that all three branches of the government are able to interact with the other branches of government to make sure that everybody's still on the level, right? Checks and balances. If one branch starts to get too far out, another branch can reel it in. That's the whole point of the checks and balances thing. And that's the theory in which our government is supposed to work. It doesn't really work that way, and you know that. But that's besides the point. That's the theory. Okay. So it would go something like this. the executive branch wants a new policy. So it goes to the legislative branch and says, we want these laws. The legislative branch determines if those laws are valid, and then, or the concept of those laws are valid. They debate them, and then they vote on them, and they become law or they don't become law. And then the judicial branch determines for the individual through the courts, and by the individual, it could be you as a person or your business or corporation, it doesn't make any difference. The court system determines if those laws are fair and being applied fairly. Does that make sense? All right. So the Chevron deference was a ruling in 1984 that said that in the event of some sort of disagreement between the individual or the business and the agency that's in charge of this thing. So let's just use the EPA, for example. I know I'm going in circles, but I'm trying to make this kind of understandable. The executive branch says, we need clean air, we need clean water, we need an agency for this. The legislative branch creates laws that bring the EPA into existence. And now the EPA is in charge of regulating things having to do with the environment. Right? Now Congress and the executive branch go on to do other things, and now the EPA takes care of that. If during the course of doing business or working, making regulations, enforcing things, the EPA oversteps its boundaries on an individual, the individual can then go to a court and say, hey, my rights are being, squashed by this EPA legislation. And the court would then decide whether or not you had a valid case. Now, one of the ways that the court would decide if you had a valid case or not was to bring in experts. And the expert would testify, they would have experts on both sides, and they would testify to what the situation is, and then the judge would make, or the court would make its decision based on the expert's testimony. It kind of makes sense, right? You following along? Well, the Chevron deference was enacted in 1984, and it was a Supreme Court decision between Chevron, the oil company, and one of the agencies, I don't recall which one it was, that said that the courts didn't need independent experts, that the experts were the agencies themselves. And so there was no need to take these debates in and clog up the court system with, these arguments or these decisions when the expert is already found in the agency. Okay, this is bad. This is really, really bad. Because now, remember, the executive class, they're not experts on anything. They're politicians, right? And they're supposed to be carrying out the will of the people, supposed to be, okay? Then the Congress, same thing. Congress, they're not experts on any particular field. They're just supposed to carry out the will of the executive branch, right? And the will of their constituents. And they vote on laws and so on and so forth, but they're not experts. So when you needed an expert, the expert would come through the court system. Well, when the Chevron deference was first employed in 1984, well, at that point, you eliminated one of the three legs of government, one of the three branches of government from that process. Because there's no decisions to be made anymore from the court. Now the decisions are made from the opinions, the expert opinions are made from the individual regulatory agencies. Now those regulatory agencies are unelected officials. The executive branch appoints the head of each of those agencies. But nowhere in there are you voting for the individuals there, or their policies, or anything like that. Once that agency is in place, that agency becomes its own entity, and it's going to create its own rules. It's supposed to be up to the judicial branch to make sure that those rules fit the Constitution, and that they're fair and applied fairly. Well, from 1984 on, that was it. It was just, the agencies were run amok. There were no checks and balances to the regulations that they were enacting. This was really bad. Now, this affects all of us. It affects us as car people. It affects us as truck people. It affects us as mechanics. It affects us as 2A people. It affects as business people, whether you're an individual or a corporation. It doesn't make any difference. It affects all of us because it really removes us from the court or from the ability to have a fair judgment, right? An impartial, fair judgment. Now, the agencies have all the power. And depending on who's running the agency, they're going to bring in people who echo their personal sentiments, their personal thoughts. And things are going to be stacked in that way. Now, for example, let's just say you were a competitive country, one of our economic competitors, and you were able to get people very sympathetic to your cause into these agencies. Well, they would make rules that would favor. So let's just say, for example, you're a country that has a lot of the materials to make electric cars. So you want electric cars. You can manufacture electric cars quickly, cheaply, and you want access to the US market. Well, you would have people sympathetic to your cause in the various agencies that would regulate that, okay? And laws would be passed in order to kind of force, regulations would be passed, I should say, that would force things to go your way. Electric car, anybody? Or if you're in the trucking industry where you deal with diesels, you got the whole DEF thing, the diesel emissions thing. It's just absolutely bizarre. It's absurd. They've complicated and destroyed the diesel, really, as the effective workhorse that it is. And to make them cleaner, there's lots of ways to make diesels clean and efficient, but the EPA has gone through great pains to make it as difficult and as expensive to maintain a clean, efficient diesel as possible. No experts, no fair and balanced arguments, right? Nothing like that, just what the EPA says. All right, so you're getting the general idea. Now, nobody, including myself, is going to argue the fact that we need agencies and we need laws and we need regulations to protect the environment, to protect really everything. You know, you do need some sort of oversight because people run amok. But with the Chevron deference in place, there was no checks and balances anymore, and the individual regulatory agencies could get away with whatever they want. Unelected officials calling the shots, and this is every agency, literally every single government agency. So this affects every aspect of all of our lives, okay? Including the right to repair, which is something that I've never gone into on this channel because if we're looking the whole right to repair thing over, I saw dead ends. There are dead ends, and the dead end was essentially the Chevron deference. Because you can't get, okay, so the right to repair is, the basis of the right to repair is that you own something, okay? You bought this thing, you own it, and so it should be your prerogative whether you want to keep it and maintain it or repair it or get rid of it, whatever it happens to be. You own this thing, so you should have access to all of the information and tools that you need to maintain and repair this thing that you own, right? Like I said, I mean, it just makes sense. You say, well, you know, in a system that's based on justice, yes, of course, you own this thing. Louis Rossmann is like the biggest proponent of the right to repair. I've been a Louis Rossmann fan for a long time. I love the guy. He's from the same place that I am. He graduated from the same high school that I got thrown out of. And it seems that watching him, like he and I have the same like brain defects. So not only do I like the guy a lot, but I relate to him on a personal level. I don't know him. I'd like to meet him at some point. But at any rate, the right to repair with the Chevron deference in place reaches a dead end. Because unless the government agencies, in this case it's mostly the FTC, see the constitutional right of the individual and recognize the constitutional right of the individual to own, maintain, repair his thing, it goes nowhere. And without the courts coming in and saying, yes, it is unconstitutional to not allow this information to be, or these tools or whatever, it hits a dead end. Well, a couple of weeks ago, the Supreme Court, which has been doing a lot of strange things lately, but kind of leaning in the right direction, I believe, my own personal opinion, overturned the Chevron deference. It no longer exists, which means that you as an individual or a business have the right and the ability now to take your case to court and have experts called on both sides so that the issue can be debated and decided whether or not it's fair or not, whether or not it's constitutional, whether or not it falls within your rights. See, this is very, very important stuff. So I see some people are like, they've flip their shit because, oh, this means that there's going to be no regulation and just anybody can pollute and anybody can do anything they want now. No, it's not like that at all. All it means is that the system of checks and balances is back in place, okay? And so the executive branch wants, just to use an example, the executive branch wants clean air. Everybody in Congress, all the individuals in Congress, they want clean air too. And all of the judges, they want clean air too. Say, we're all in agreement, right? We all want clean air, but it has to be done in a reasonable way. You can't have extortive practices through these agencies without having some sort of balance. And that's the important part about this dismantling of the Chevron deference. I know this seems like very long-winded, very convoluted, but my point here is that it's a step in the right direction. Now, this doesn't mean that all of these insane and ridiculous regulations that have come into place over the last 40 years, the monster that this thing has grown into, it doesn't mean that the monster gets killed overnight and we return back to the way it's supposed to be tomorrow, but it's a step in the right direction, and it opens the doors. It allows us to start putting things back into a more fair, more equitable, more constitutionally correct way of doing things. Okay, so I hope you got something out of that. I know I'm going to stay away from these topics in the future, but it's something I really thought that everybody here needs to be made aware of. Every American really needs to be made aware of this and how these systems work. All right, guys. I'll see you tomorrow.